Hey, good afternoon, Atlanta. It's finally Friday. Welcome to our fourth Opportunity Zone chat in this we call the Invest Atlanta Lives. Over the past weeks, we've heard from our business community about the effect COVID is having on all Atlantans and the need to pivot our business community during this crisis towards a recovery. Today, I'd like to take a minute to recognize Invest Atlanta and this team's ability to really promote and advance Atlanta's 26 federal opportunity zones. We're very proud of the recognition we received on the National Opportunity Zone stage. Among other things, Atlanta has received a significant grant to drive social impact in local OZs from the Rockefeller Foundation. And I might add that this is an honor that was only granted to 6 cities across America. And the Invest Atlanta team has stood out as a leader among this cohort. In addition to that, our Opportunity Zone initiative was featured as one of the top 10 federal Opportunity Zone initiatives across the nation by Forbes magazine back in December. And Dr. Ed Smith, who is with us today, has been leading those efforts. And so we're very grateful for him and his expertise. Today, we have a very special guest, Rhett Buttle of the Public-Private Strategies based in Washington, D.C. Rhett has been a real bipartisan advocate for transformational business policy in the public realm for many years, and he's organized business policy at the White House, governor's offices, and federal agencies, and on the presidential campaigns. Today, he leads Public-Private Strategies, a consultant agency that aims to create opportunities where the public and private sectors meet. This is especially important for us in Atlanta as we are embarking on new economic mobility strategies. And so philanthropic public-private partnerships are really going to be key to that success. He's also successfully built state business coalitions that have amplified public policy positions on many key topics. And I know personally Rhett from DC, so I'm very glad to have him today. And today's conversation is going to really be about those topics. You'll get some insight into the impact of COVID-19 on opportunity zones and other distressed communities, and strategies that the public and private sectors should consider in recovery and resiliency efforts. I'd also like to add that, Invest Atlanta and the City of Atlanta have received a substantial amount of money from the CARES Act that we plan on assisting and providing that to our business community. And so we're ramping up for that. We've already had some initiatives that we've launched, and we'll be launching many more. So I'm very excited about today's chat. Thank you again for joining us on a Friday of a short week. And without further ado, let's bring in Ed and Rhett.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that great introduction, Nathan. Rhett, welcome to our Invest Atlanta live stream. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, Invest Atlanta has implemented an Opportunity Zone initiative to promote social impact investments that lead to job creation, affordable housing, addressing deserts, medical deserts, food deserts, etc. Our initiative has 4 key components: community engagement, collaboration and identification of project sponsors that lead to these social impact outcomes, working with social impact funds to help finance these projects or to help facilitate introductions between the project sponsors and the finance community, and a research component. Through our work at Invest Atlanta, we have engaged a number of service providers and philanthropic partners, and Public-Private Strategies has been one of the organizations that has taken a leadership role in helping Invest Atlanta fulfill its mission of promoting these social outcomes here in our city. So with that being said, I'd like to pass the microphone over to you, Rhett. If you can, you and I, we've talked extensively over, the past year. I'd really like you to, before we dive into this, offer a little bit on your background and experiences. I know you've done a lot of social impact work, government work, and how you got to public-private strategies.
Sure. First, I have to say we love Atlanta. We love Invest Atlanta. That's true because we're here on a Friday afternoon. Otherwise, that wouldn't be the case. And we, the whole team at Public-Private Strategies and many of our partners, both at the federal government and through philanthropic institutions, have have loved our collaborations with you, but also admired your leadership in so many ways. And I think Invest Atlanta has been such a huge model for other cities around the countries in the ways that you guys have worked both on opportunity zones and the work that you're doing with small business development, and excited about the conversation around COVID today, because I think out of every crisis comes an opportunity. Just a little bit about public-private strategies. As Nathan mentioned, we're a bipartisan firm. We're focused really on harnessing the power of the private sector to bring positive change in society. Sometimes we do that through policy change. A lot of times it's through a focus on communities, but we really believe that the private sector is core to making change in society and creating positive, vibrant communities. And so that's really what has led us to doing the work around opportunity zones. It's what's led us to work on making sure that business leaders have a voice in policy. And it's really what's led us in the last few months to be laser-like focused in COVID recovery, both on focusing on investing in small businesses, investing in communities, and really understanding also how corporate actors can be good players with their workers and their communities. So excited to open the conversation today and to continue the great partnership with Invest Atlanta.
Perfect. Thank you. So just for perhaps we can dive a little bit deeper into public-private strategies. We're going to talk about some of your opportunity zone related work, and we're going to transition into the work that you've been undergoing related to small businesses and COVID-19. But can you, the various components of public-private strategies and the types of work that you all are doing across the country, can you offer a little bit of insight and overview of that?
Yeah, so we do sort of three types of work. One is, we do a lot of advising both with corporate partners and philanthropic partners, and that's where a lot of our work has sat in opportunity zone space. We've had the privilege to work with a number of national philanthropic actors to help them really understand how the opportunity zone incentive can be used to really bring investment to much needed areas of specific cities around the country, in addition to obviously with the amazing work that's being done in Atlanta. And then we do quite a bit in the advocacy space as well, particularly with small businesses and making sure small business voices are heard by state, local, and federal policymakers. Small businesses, as we all know, they're the backbone of our economy. They create 2 out of every 3 jobs in our country. They're a huge employer in communities, including the city of Atlanta. There were new ideas and innovation is formed. And so the reality is there's a lot of them. So sometimes it's difficult to make sure that their voice is accurately represented. So our firm tries to give some muscle to that. And then we do quite a bit of thought leadership and research is really our third bucket. And one of the reasons for that is because we see great opportunities in collaborations and learning. And I think here's another example in the opportunity zone space where we've had the opportunity to really work with Invest Atlanta and you, Ed, which is to help facilitate conversations between you and your peers across other cities. Because obviously always Atlanta is the best and the leader, and we want everyone to learn from what Atlanta is doing. But also there are opportunities from Atlanta to learn from other cities across the country about things that are working for them that might work back at home for you. And so we really try to set tables like that and cross-pollinate and share information across cities. And so that best practices are really taken back home. And so as we're thinking about building wealth in communities, all across the country, we can make sure that works in the communities that we're working in.
That's great. One thing, perhaps, could you talk a little bit? Earlier this year, you helped facilitate a gathering here in Atlanta with leading philanthropic partners and education partners. So can you describe that? So I think that's a really good example of the type of work that you all are doing to promote the social impact outcomes. So can you describe that event so our audience has a little bit more flavor on how you all operate in the space?
Yeah, happy to do so. Look, I think, the opportunity zone incentive is a really interesting tool. The reality is when it became law, it was unexpected. And so I think there's been over the last year and a half that those of us who've been working on this, there's been a lot of inquiry into, how to make this tool best work for cities, for communities, particularly for communities of color, and ways in which we can build wealth in communities. And so we had the privilege of partnering with Invest Atlanta and the Rockefeller Foundation to host a convening at Spelman. And one of the things that was so unique about this convening was we had philanthropic actors from all across the country. So we had national philanthropic actors We had folks who represented more local communities. We had folks who had a statewide focus. And I think the goal of the convening was to really answer a question about what are the different ways in which philanthropy can play in this space to really help make sure that the opportunity incentive works for the communities that I think we all really care about. And so that was an amazing day of conversation where we were able to sort of bring a cross-pollination of leaders together. And that was, that was thanks to the leadership of you all, thanks to the leadership of the Rockefeller Foundation, who I know has had an amazing partnership with Invest Atlanta. And a lot of really important learnings came out of that conversation that I think have benefited the city of Atlanta, but have also, quite frankly, benefited a lot of cities who, necessarily haven't been on the leading edge of opportunity zones. We had some folks who were showing up and they were kind of at a beginning place, and we have some advanced folks in the room. So the opportunity to have that dialogue, to exchange that information, and to sort of make sure that the impact is being maximized, I think was the focus of that event.
So Nathan, you and I have had this conversation multiple times in the context of this work and the other work that we're doing here at Invest Atlanta. And Rhett, as you know, the Opportunity Zone Tax Incentive is just one tool that we have in our toolkit. So Nathan, can you please just describe some of the other tools and offer some insight to our audience on the other tools that we have at Invest Atlanta from a more broad perspective?
Yeah, and that's such a such a really great question, because the opportunity zones, the federal opportunity zones, don't really live just by themselves. Anytime we're dealing with an investor or a company that's looking at the city of Atlanta, we want to make sure that they're aware of all the opportunities that they have to take advantage of our projects and programs that are available to them. The state opportunity zones, they're another big driver for investment. And I just want to thank BCG, Boston Consulting Group. They've done a great job in taking advantage of really a place where we really want to drive investment. Downtown. Their operations, they've invested multi-million dollars worth of people and product into their office in Atlanta. And that is exactly what we want people to do, right? That's the intent of the tool, for people to actually drive investment where we need it in the city. And so I think that's just a great opportunity for us to layer these different.
Are you inviting us to open an office in Atlanta? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
I want to make sure the offer is clear.
The offer is there. It's publicly available. Everybody can take advantage of it. Yes, definitely. So yeah, we certainly have a lot of different tools as a development authority for the city of Atlanta, and certainly in concert with our local and state partners, Fulton County and the state of Georgia. We can work with them together, and we do oftentimes do that to create a package of incentives that could be very interesting, that also meets our goals of economic mobility, and hiring people and having investment in the city, especially during the COVID crisis. We're noticing that we're going to need that additional investment in the city, that CapEx into the city, and we have so many people who are being laid off. So we're really going to be pushing on that to really make sure that we can drive those outcomes.
So thank you for that overview, Nathan. Perhaps if we can pivot a little bit and address the elephant in the room. I'm sure the audience wants to know, why are we doing a live stream right now? Of course, we're doing a live stream because we're practicing social distancing and following the guidelines recommended to us in order to get through this global pandemic. But as we transition to the COVID-19 conversation, Nathan, I know that you and the rest of the team, we here at Invest Atlanta have been exploring and developing a number of tools to help address some of the negative impacts of COVID-19 here in Atlanta. So can you provide a little bit of oversight, and then we'll turn it over to Rhett to talk more broadly on the national scene in COVID-19?
Well, it actually, I actually think, Rhett, this is perfect for you. I mean, when we talk about philanthropic collaboration, we've been very lucky here in Atlanta. And I do want to give a special hat tip out to the Arthur Blank Foundation, to Regions Bank. They've made generous donations to the city and to Invest Atlanta that is really helping drive our recovery efforts. So I really think this conversation is really perfectly timed. I mean, we can't do it without our philanthropic community, and we need them. And most importantly, I mean, the companies and the businesses in the city of Atlanta are giving back in normal times, and now we're asking them to do more. And that's really when a company's corporate social responsibility, their ESG, is really kicking into overdrive. And we're really seeing that our business community is really vested in the city of Atlanta and helping us achieve our outcomes. So we can't do it without those philanthropic partners. And so, Rhett, I'd love to have your take on what you see happening across the country, and maybe giving us some insight, as to what's going on around the country.
Yeah, I would just offer a few thoughts. I mean, I think it's important to remember that a lot of inequities in our society existed before COVID. And one of the things that COVID has done is it has just put a spotlight on the need for us all to do more. And I think the opportunity here, or I always try to find the silver lining, the good part of this is that we're seeing unprecedented collaboration. We are seeing those folks step up. And, I think in general, traditional philanthropy has been quick to respond. I think they see a really important role for cities and municipalities. We see leaders like the Rockefeller Foundation, like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, moving quickly to really focus on, making sure that not only cities, but their existing grantees have, quick and rapid support to be able to do the work that they need to do, giving them sort of flexibility beyond sort of their, traditional sort of mandate to really trust them and sort of embed them. And I think this is also a big moment for corporate leadership. And I think it extends beyond ESG. I think ESG is an important part of it. But everything that we've seen about ESG in the last few years is that if you are a corporate player who is doing interesting things through your philanthropy, it only really works well if it matches with your business practice, and it has to flow both ways. I think the philanthropy has to support the business practice, but the business practice also has to be in line with the philanthropy, and that's a really important piece of it. And I think COVID is a moment for that. And I think we're living in an interesting day and age where people are really turning to the private sector to be leaders. They trust their employers for information, and that in that way we need large corporations to really step up and sort of be leaders. And I think we're seeing that. Atlanta is an interesting place because you have so many corporations who call Atlanta home, and so there's a unique opportunity, I think, for these business leaders to really play a role. There's an organization that some of you might be familiar with on the conversation today called Just Capital. One of the things Just Capital has been doing, they've been doing an interesting corporate tracker looking at corporations and how they're responding to COVID and the coronavirus. And one of the things that they found, it makes sense upon saying it, but sometimes we need research and metrics to show us. One of the things they found is, corporations who do well by their communities and who do well by their employees, they're recovering faster. And they're going to recover faster.
Yep.
And so I think that's an important reminder to all of us in this sort of collective impact moment, whether you're in traditional philanthropy, whether those of us who sit in government, quasi-government, those of us who sit in the private sector, we have to think about the decisions we make today are going to be really important to the sort of future we want to build coming out of this crisis.
So, Rhett, through your work nationally, you have a perspective on what other communities are doing in response to COVID-19, as we at Invest Atlanta continue to develop the strategies to promote social impact in light of the current pandemic. I was wondering, if possible, if you had a few examples of success stories or concrete innovative ideas that you have seen in other communities that can inform the work that we're doing here at Invest Atlanta.
Yeah. So I would add sort of one big takeaway that I'm seeing, and I, would be curious also to hear a little bit about how you all are thinking about it. I really, and some of this may be because of my bias, but, one of the things that I think we're seeing interestingly around the country is a renewed focus on small business and the importance of small business in our country. And I alluded, in the chat about why that is so important, but everyone in the private sector has an important role to play, everyone in the philanthropy, but really, Americans do best when we're sort of pushed up against the wall. That's when the innovation comes out. And that innovation really happens with our entrepreneurs and a private sector community. And I know that Atlanta has a bustling sector of entrepreneurship, and you all know it much well. But I think what we're seeing from an investment flow standpoint, whether that's philanthropic dollars or federal dollars flowing down, is that there's a renewed interest in small business. We see some of that from the federal government too. today we probably don't want to open up a conversation about sort of the federal government's response in the PPP, but I think what is important about that is the recognition that small business is going to be key. And as we're talking with city leaders across the country, part of that is also being intentional about who and how we're investing in. And I think as we think about how the American economy is changing, as we think about women and folks in communities of color actually starting businesses faster and more rapidly, we have to be really smart and strategic about the way that we are supporting and creating the right ecosystems to make sure that entrepreneurship is being manifested in a way that makes sense, and that we are growing the sort of economy coming out of this that we all want to be a player in.
Yeah, and if I might jump in on that one, I think you've definitely hit it on the head. We have shifted our entire operations at Invest Atlanta really to support our small business community. I mean, look, Invest Atlanta, we do a lot of different things from, affordable housing to community redevelopment to national, international, foreign direct.
Well, and I'll just say, if you talk to corporate players, it's the same play for them, because many of them, even though they run large companies, they recognize the power of small business and entrepreneurship. Many of them started in those spaces. So.
Yeah, and we've shifted everything on our teams, and Ed can testify to this. We've brought him out on this as well. Initially at the very beginning of the crisis, we received an allocation from the mayor, and we want to thank her publicly for that, to help our small business community, and that was really the focus, and will continue to be the focus for us for the foreseeable future as we move through this crisis, through recovery. And and really what I think is key and critical to mention here is that the dollars that we're receiving and actually putting back into our small business community, as we run the data and the metrics on how this is affecting our small business community, who and where, we're seeing that roughly 70%, a little bit higher than 70% of all of our dollars are going to women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and we're getting that across the entire city. So we're very proud of that, and I think that's going to continue. And as we receive additional funding to be able to support our small business community, we want to continue to see those metrics come in. And I'll just also mention that it's not just small businesses that we're also looking at. You've hit on something also very good. Entrepreneurship is so critical and crucial to Atlanta's economy and who we are as a city. We are developing grant programs and loan programs and funding sources for our entrepreneurs, and I think that's kind of a leading edge thing. It's really tough when you talk about a startup. How do we actually get a startup that's actually trying to survive in normal times? How do we support them to get through this? And how do we work with them to make sure that Atlanta is still strong in the end? So it's not just small businesses at Invest Atlanta. We're also thinking about our entrepreneur and the ecosystem that surrounds them. And we've been interviewing some of those key stakeholders through our Facebook Live. So it is a holistic approach for sure.
Yeah. The other piece I'd add, I didn't mean to cut you off, Ed,
No.
but the other piece I'd add is, I think now is a moment to be intentional about equity. And, I think we're seeing that more with cities, sometimes in these moments of recovery, folks will say like, it's not the time to focus on, all of these things. But now is exactly the time, because we have an opportunity to be intentional about what we want to build, about what we want the future to look like, about the sort of investments we want to make. And so
there's an urgency to it, if I might add.
That's right. And I think, we are seeing cities and municipal leaders be more thoughtful about that. Now more than ever, there's tools available, right? There's, scorecards and, a lot of this is common sense, but, now we have the data to help us guide the decisions. And so, I think it's something that you all have done well, but I know something, that we would encourage you all to continue to sort of, guide by.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. We have really, equity is such a big play in everything that we do. It sits as a lens in front of all of our programs. And, we certainly have heard from our city council and our leaders, our civic leaders, that equity is so important. And we also believe that. And we're moving towards doing more equity work. How do we actually get people in economic mobility positions? And how do we create investments in the city that really fulfill that mission, right? And so, when we talk about economic development, it's not just we take anything. We're actually curators for the city. We want to be curating the right type of companies and the right type of small business ecosystems that really accomplish those goals. Definitely.
So Nathan, if you may, can you please just drill down a little bit? I know our audience is going to be curious about what types of things does Invest Atlanta look for in terms of support? And you and I, we've had extensive conversations about the economic mobility strategy and how that fits into the future of all of our work. So perhaps you can talk about when someone comes into the proverbial doors now, because they're not coming into any of our doors, but what are the types of things as it relates to job creation or wages? What types of things are we looking for the types of programs we have in investment?
Yeah, well, Atlanta's been very fortunate over the past decade to have experienced a very large economic boom, right? And so I think the challenge has been that not everyone has benefited from that boom, right? And so
Mm.
this ties into the conversation we're having. Now as we look at proverbial people walking through the door, we want to make sure that we have the right type of middle wage job creation that's so critical and crucial for economic mobility across the city. We want to see investments that are actually working with our partners, philanthropic partners, our workforce development partners.
Mhm.
We want to make sure that we understand exactly who is benefiting from the investment in this city and who's allowed to participate. We want to make sure that we're breaking down these socioeconomic barriers so that all Atlantans can actually participate in the economic growth that we're going to experience. And so as we go through this recovery, I think Atlanta is well poised from a diverse ecosystem, the right sort of political will to actually move on economic mobility and equity. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to come out of this stronger. And I actually think Atlanta will recover quicker than other cities that don't have these types of initiatives in place.
Rhett, as we begin to wrap up this conversation, I was wondering if you could maybe take a slight spin on Nathan's answer there and
Yep.
perhaps offer some insight to entrepreneurs and small business owners, uh, given the current pandemic and just given your background and experience. If someone said, what is the best thing I can do to position myself for success given the current climate? Can you offer some insight there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's going to sound a little hokey. I think it's a few things, which is, out of every crisis is an opportunity. Hang in there. We need you. And I think it's, there's people rooting for you. One of the hardest things about being a small business owner and being an entrepreneur, I know a little bit about this. I started a business myself, but is, there are so many external barriers. There's a lot of no's, and I think particularly in this time, it can be challenging to think about, am I doing the right thing? I would say, this is a moment for opportunity and innovation. And so I think if you can put that sort of cap on and think about that, great things can come to you. I would also say that there are great partners awaiting you. Your city, your community, Invest Atlanta is cheering you on, and that is really the way that I would think about this situation.
Closing thoughts before we wrap this up, Nathan? Anything you want to add on the support of small businesses here in Atlanta?
Yeah, well, look, I would say, again, you've stolen a little bit of our thunder, Rhett. I actually think this is an opportunity for us to come out of this crisis stronger. I think the initiatives we have in place as we continue to drive towards economic mobility and equity across the city are going to make us a stronger city. And so I love to have these conversations. I think the more we talk about it, the more light we shine on the issues, I think the better. And so we appreciate your partnership, Rhett, and look forward to working more closely with you.
Likewise, thank you all so much for having me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. For those more interested in our Opportunity Zone initiative, please visit atlopportunityzones.com. Enjoy your Friday.
Happy Friday.
Thanks.